Perfect.
Hi, Lily. So, really quick introduction to everybody. Lily Nichols is a registered dietitian. She is a specialist in prenatal nutrition, and she's a best-selling author of Real Food for Gestational Diabetes. And today she's here to share with us her latest book, and I have it right here, which is Real Food for Pregnancy. We'll be discussing which foods to eat for optimal prenatal nutrition and some tips for managing stress. And I have a bunch of other questions for Lily so that you can be really confident with your food and lifestyle choices to support a smooth, healthy pregnancy. And of course, a little bit before you get pregnant. So welcome, Lily. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, I appreciate the invite. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So, okay, let's go ahead and get started. So, why don't you go ahead and tell us about your background as a dietitian, how you got started on that?
Sure. Well, I've been interested in nutrition for my whole life. So I was one of those people who went into my training, my university training, fully knowing that I was going to study nutrition, and everyone told me I'd change my major, and I didn't, and I stuck with it. So here I am. After I finished my conventional training, did a hospital internship and all that stuff, I sort of ended up niching down into prenatal nutrition a little bit by accident, but I kind of loved it, so I kept with it. I worked with the state of California for their diabetes and pregnancy program, which was a nonprofit that helped educate different healthcare professionals and women about managing gestational diabetes. So we worked on their guidelines and taught professional education on that topic. And it was really in working from there, I started doing more work in prenatal care and gestational diabetes work, and was a little disappointed actually, because I started implementing the guidelines that I had been working on in the public policy setting and found that they actually didn't help control my patients' blood sugar very well, and sometimes made their blood sugar worse. And that really got me questioning why our prenatal guidelines are what they are, what would make more sense. And so a lot of my work was really, focused on gestational diabetes, for quite a long time. So hence the topic of my first book. And of course I wanted to branch out into, more general prenatal nutrition, because the nutrition and lifestyle advice you use for better blood sugar management is important even for women who don't have diagnosable blood sugar issues. So it's along a similar spectrum, but every pregnant woman, every woman planning to conceive, every woman who is breastfeeding can benefit from a more nutrient-dense diet, both for her own health, but also for her baby's health as well.
Okay, and so do you think, is there a difference between just a great diet that we should all be following, or best practices in nutrition versus best practices for getting or staying pregnant?
That's a hard question. There are some differences, because there are certain nutrients that are particularly important to have on your radar during the preconception planning and during pregnancy, and especially during breastfeeding. Actually, our nutrient needs are highest postpartum and in the first 6 months of breastfeeding, by the way, higher than during pregnancy. But there are certain nutrients that we need to emphasize more in the preconception and early pregnancy time than for a general person. So one that everybody talks about is folic acid, right? Which I think we should specify. A better form would be folate or methylfolate, supplement-wise, or the folate that you find in food. So green leafy vegetables, liver, legumes, avocado, excellent source. That's a really important vitamin to help prevent neural tube defects. So it's important for brain development for your baby. And that is something that is really important preconception, because your baby's organs all form during the first 8 weeks of pregnancy. By the time you get a positive pregnancy test, you're already technically 4 weeks based on how they do the dating. So a lot of these risk factors for some of these pretty serious problems with baby actually come back to preconception nutrition. So folate, hugely important. Another one that's hugely important during this time is choline, which is sort of like a long lost cousin to folate, a B vitamin-like compound that's also important for brain development and prevention of neural tube defects and prevention of all sorts of other pregnancy complications as well, like preeclampsia. And the research on this is like exploding in the last 5 or so years, showing we need pretty high amounts of choline. So for that one, egg yolks are going to be absolutely your number one source, and second to that is liver. So these are just 2 very small examples, but yes, there are some special considerations to foods and nutrients to emphasize during and before pregnancy, for sure.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah, we talk a lot about that folic acid and how a lot of people can't break it down. So
Yes.
the methylfolate and how important that is. What do you think is the biggest misconception when it comes to prenatal nutrition?
Probably that you can get everything in a prenatal vitamin. That's a big one. Just eat your usual stuff and just take your prenatal, and then you'll have all your bases covered. Unfortunately, that's just not true because prenatal vitamins are of variable quality, first of all. They may not contain certain vitamins or minerals at all. For example, choline, the one we were just talking about, usually isn't found in prenatals, even though it's hugely important. Mm-hmm. It's just such a bulky nutrient. It takes up so much space that in order to fit it in sufficient quantities, the supplement companies would have to give you like 8 or more capsules a day, and nobody wants to take that. So they try to keep it to 1 to 3, 1 to 4 a day, and they just leave choline out or put teeny tiny amounts in. The forms of vitamins can be different than what's found in food. So a good example of that is folic acid. And this is getting kind of a lot of airtime. It's a little funny because there's a lot of different genetic variances that can affect how our body utilizes nutrients. But one that's getting a lot of popularity in sort of the blogosphere is one called MTHFR, which affects your ability to use folic acid, which is a synthetic version of folate that they put in supplements, especially prenatal vitamins. And that affects up to 60% of the population. So that's huge. If you can't use folic acid appropriately, then you might actually have like a clinical folate deficiency because you're not utilizing what you're getting from the supplement. So better option A would be, finding a prenatal that has a better form of folate, like the methylfolate we were talking about, but also emphasizing food sources of these nutrients so you cover all of your bases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talk a lot about the MTHFR mutation. I have a lot of fights with doctors about getting tested for it. So we actually changed it to just take the broken down version, the methylfolate, and also test for fasting homocysteine, because that will show the buildup of MTHFR mutation, and just another way of tracking
inflammatory stuff. Yeah. And the MTHFR, by the way, the folate cycle, there's a lot of different nutrients involved in it. So it's not just folate, but, choline, an amino acid called glycine, vitamin B12, like these things are also important for the whole utilization of folate by your body. So again, it's so hard to like single things down to supplements, because food, of course, comes with all of these nutrients in this like synergistic quantity that it's meant to have, that our bodies know. I mean, we didn't identify our first vitamins till the early 1900s. What did pregnant women do before that? Like, we ate food, So, supplements are important. I have a whole chapter on it in the book, and, a bunch of information about choosing a good prenatal, but we really have to bring the conversation back to food. Yes.
Yes, I agree. I say all the time, I believe that everything can be reduced. Any bad thing, any sickness, disease can be reduced or completely removed through the gut. So
many things.
I'm a big believer in that. I love what you're doing.
Thank you.
Okay. So why don't we talk about, you have a chapter in this book. You have a lot of great chapters in this book, but one of the chapters in this book is about stress management. So why don't you talk about that. How do you recommend people use food for stress management?
Oh,
Or is that not
meaning,
what or whatever, what, what was that chapter about?
well, that chapter specifically is about like managing our self-care and mental health. Food is a component of that for sure.
Okay.
So certain nutrients do affect our brain health, just because certain nutrients are involved in the production of neurotransmitters, inflammation as side effects on our mental well-being and all of that. So things like vitamin B12 has been linked to lower levels of anxiety. DHA and omega-3 has been linked to lower levels of prenatal depression. So food is, yes, like a part of keeping ourselves mentally well as like physically outside of brain health well. That chapter also goes through different practices to help you manage and mitigate stress, because one of the things that became apparent as I was working on this through my own pregnancy as well, but especially as I was researching this book, is there are a lot of well-documented negative effects of stress on pregnancy outcomes. Higher risks of certain complications, even some of the mental health stuff that can be going on, depression, anxiety, and whatnot, can actually have carryover effects on the child that they can measure in infants. So that chapter is just a lot about, yes, some food stuff, but also like, how can you take care of yourself? Like, we need to look at the whole care of women trying to conceive and pregnant women and postpartum women through a holistic lens. We can't just assume that like food will fix everything, because you can get like crazy obsessive about your food and have a sort of, disorder around it that's not great for your mental health. You could be consuming all these nutrients, but you're so high stress, so anxiety, so wound up about the whole thing that's in the end not serving you, right? So whatever practices help people manage stress, whether it's meditation, mindfulness. I'm a big fan of mindfulness for everything, but mindful eating as well. If it's movement, if it's something that's faith-based, I mean, there can be many different avenues for reducing stress in your life. It's just really important during this time.
Yes, I agree. And when you talk about mindful eating, what exactly do you mean by that?
So I mean, with mindful eating, I'm referring to listening to your body, listening to the signals your body gives surrounding food. So this can be any number of things. At the simplest, we could be talking, hunger and fullness cues. So being conscious of when you're hungry, you have permission to eat. When you start to feel full, you have permission to slow down and or stop. If you're eating something and you really don't like it, you have permission to not eat it. If you're eating something that you love, you have permission to keep eating. This sort of like allowing your body to talk to you and responding to those cues. A lot of people think that this is just sort of like gives people sort of a free-for-all permission to eat whatever they want in whatever quantity, and like you'll end up with disastrous results. But actually the studies show that this works really well, meaning people tend to make healthier choices, eat less junk food, eat the right quantity, maintain their weight better, or gain the more appropriate amount of weight during pregnancy when they incorporate these mindful eating principles. So, I'm a super data-driven person. There's like tons of citations in my work. And yes, there's like certain foods and nutrients we should emphasize and in certain quantities, but there's also, this is important to balance with this mindful approach of like, what is your body telling you and why? Even certain, pregnancy cravings and food aversions like can have a purpose, and trusting that your body is not steering you in the right direction, but maybe has some wisdom to share with you, usually helps you out in the long run. So
yeah, so it's about, how do you feel? It's about acknowledging and understanding how you feel before
yes.
you eat, while you're eating, and then especially, I think the key is after you eat. right? To know,
Yes.
did that, did that help me or hurt me?
Yeah. Yeah. Especially checking in within, 1, 2 to 3 hours after eating. How are your energy levels?
Hmm.
I mean, that is so telling. I mean, that could tell you, say your energy's crashing. That could tell you you didn't eat enough food, period. That's possible. It could tell you that you ate the wrong balance of macronutrients. So especially when people are eating things really high carb, especially high processed carbohydrates or high sugar, you get a sugar spike and then a sugar crash. And it's a physiological hormonal response. It's not a willpower thing, but it'll leave you very hungry and probably cranky and craving more things to give you an energy boost like sugar, caffeine, or some kind of junk food. So if that's going on, it's usually a sign that something maybe was not the best choice at the previous meal or not in the right proportions or quantity or whatnot, right? But just getting really curious about, why is my body sending me this signal for X, Y, and Z? And like learning from it, but also honoring it in that time. If you're really low energy, you probably should eat. Like, your body's not dumb for telling you that you're hungry. Certainly, as your diet shifts to less processed foods that don't have, as much added sugar or fake flavor chemicals, things that food companies use to trick us into being hungry, like, these signals even out and get easier to decipher, I guess. But even still, even if you have some junk food, like, your body's still going to send you some important signals after that. How does your stomach feel? Is your digestion good? Is your energy levels good? Are you feeling like clear-headed, or is your thinking a little clouded? Like, those are all really important messages.
Yes. Yes. I think how you're digesting the food, not to be too graphic, but how you're digesting the food, and also sleep.
Yeah.
Right? Isn't your sleep really affected? Like when you wake up groggy, when you just need more sleep than usual, isn't that usually due to eating the wrong foods?
It can be. I mean, it can be a number of things, right? So many things affect our sleep. It could be, I was just talking to a client recently who uh, her sleep isn't that great, and all of her sleep hygiene stuff was off. It was like going to sleep too late. There
Mhm.
was no blackout curtains, and she's in a city, so there's a lot of outside light coming in, which affects your hormone balance. It affects your melatonin, so you're not going to sleep as deeply. Blue screens right before bed, which again affects your melatonin production. So in her case, it wasn't necessarily food. It was just like general sleep hygiene that
Mhm.
wasn't working out well. But absolutely, food is one of the components that affects your sleep. And so if you're, eating maybe too large of a meal right before bed, sometimes that's tough to, your digestion is like too active in the middle of the night. It's hard for it to wind down. Going to bed too late, maybe snacking on sugary stuff. And by the way, if sugar cravings are coming up, that's like a pretty good sign to start getting mindful about what else is happening earlier in the day, all the way back to breakfast. Sometimes it can be related to first thing in the morning. But yeah, there's a lot of carryover things that affect sleep. And in pregnancy, it's even more challenging because you have like a baby kicking, or it's uncomfortable. It's hard to find the right position. You have to wake up to pee all the time. So there's like extra challenges with sleep during pregnancy, and then way more postpartum, but we don't have to go into that.
And so just to differentiate, would you recommend a different diet for prenatal versus pregnancy?
Meaning preparing for pregnancy and then during pregnancy?
Yes.
It would not be much different. No.
Okay.
Uh, what you have more wiggle room with pre-pregnancy is things that are more likely to cause you to get like food poisoning. Uh, those things are not a concern pre-pregnancy because your immune system has not yet changed. Like, your immune system changes during pregnancy to accommodate a growing baby, so your body doesn't recognize it as like a foreign thing. So it's accommodating your baby's growth. And because of that, you become more susceptible to getting, salmonella or listeria or some of these other things. So some of the concerns about food safety are less of a concern pre-pregnancy, because you don't yet have a baby growing there. So you have more wiggle room with those. You also have more wiggle room supplement wise, because there's some supplements that are, contraindicated in pregnancy, or maybe you have to be more careful about the dosages, but pre-pregnancy you have more wiggle room. But during pregnancy, the food choices, not that much different. The same foods that help you get pregnant help you stay pregnant. So nutrient dense foods from the get-go are going to build up your nutrient stores and make it easier for you to stay well nourished during your pregnancy, especially if you end up facing food aversions or nausea in the first trimester, which is quite common. Mm-hmm. So,
okay, and then I think this is my last question, but most the women that I'm working with are either going through fertility treatments, having issues getting or staying pregnant, or are newly pregnant. Have you seen any foods that are a must to have while trying to get pregnant? I don't know if you've seen a difference between women who are having trouble getting or staying pregnant versus just anybody trying to get pregnant. What are those foods that are just a must? Like, I almost feel like avocado is like everybody should try to eat avocado. But what are the foods that are a must? And then on the other hand, what are just some foods? I'm sure your book goes through all this, and I see that it has such great resources and recipes and all that. But what are some foods to then also completely avoid?
Right. Yeah. So, my whole goal is to reverse engineer the perfect prenatal diet, so people can be getting the majority of their nutrient needs met from food alone. So my recommendations are different than the conventional guidelines, so I'll say that before I jump in. But the foods to emphasize preconception and during pregnancy might surprise people. Avocado is fantastic, but it's not one that's like top of my list. It's like high in folate, high in B6, high in potassium, high in healthy fats, high in fiber. It's great. It's fantastic. But a lot of those nutrients you can easily get in other foods as well. So it doesn't quite make the cut on this is a must. The things that do make that list are the foods that give us nutrients that are a lot more challenging to get from other places in our diet. And a lot of those foods are actually foods of animal origin. When you start looking at the foods that they're the nutrients that are most commonly lacking or in prenatal diets or pregnant women are more commonly deficient in, it points to choline. 94% of women don't consume enough choline based on even the current recommendation, which is 450 milligrams per day. And we have studies showing that it's likely pregnant women need double that amount to optimize their health and optimize their baby's brain development. The top two sources of choline are egg yolks and liver. So those are fantastic foods to include. Women who eat eggs consume double the amount of choline as women who don't eat eggs. So I know liver is like a weird food and a lot of people are kind of like put off by it. There are many other good reasons to consume liver, but eggs, okay, that's an easy sell. Eat your eggs, all the choline, the yolks, eat the yolks, okay? Probably 2 or 3 a day would be optimal, and aim for 3 at minimum if you're somebody who doesn't consume many animal foods, because you're not going to be getting much choline from other places. Other than eggs and liver, I would say, and this will be an odd one for people, but it is a really important source of nutrition, would be meat on the bone or slow cooked meat. And there are many reasons for that. Vitamin B12, iron, vitamin B6, zinc, these things play key roles in fertility and health during pregnancy, and they're primarily found in those foods like animal, like meat. But specifically the tough cuts that I'm talking about, those contain a really special amino acid called glycine, which is very, very important for a lot of things during pregnancy, for the baby and your like hair, skin, nails, connective tissue, skeleton. Also important for the creation of baby's DNA. I mean, that's very important. It's involved in the choline, folate, methylation cycle, which affects like development of like a vast number of organs. So that's important. But it also becomes what's called conditionally essential during pregnancy, meaning a lot of pregnant women don't get enough and you have to get it from diet alone. So pre-pregnancy is like a special case. You're kind of you're like in that in-between phase, but once you get into pregnancy, that's when you really want to start ramping up these foods. So that's a fantastic thing to incorporate. So bone broth, if you're eating poultry, like chicken or turkey, eat it with the skin on. Of course, you want to be very picky about your sourcing of animal foods because there are all sorts of environmental, ethical, contaminant issues that go into meat production, but animals that are pasture raised or grass fed will have lower levels of antibiotic residues. They generally won't be consuming pesticides, and they also have higher levels of nutrients overall. So be picky about your animal foods. Fish and seafood, really important sources of iodine. Iodine is key for regulating menstrual cycles, often very helpful. You know, dairy cows, they actually give them an iodine supplement to induce ovulation. Like you'll see cycles normalize when people consume adequate iodine. It's crazy. And seafood is like one of the richest sources. So not only like the animal fish and seafood, but also seaweed itself is a really nice thing to incorporate in the diet. So they make like dulse flakes that you can mix with your salt and put on your foods. Those little nori seaweed snacks are great. The ones that, they're like, you know, just salted. You could wrap avocado in them, like little mini sushi sort of things. They're really tasty. Also fish itself, you know, high in omega-3 fats, especially that DHA. That's important for overall fertility. Also really important for baby's brain development and your health during pregnancy. We can't ignore plants. So non-starchy vegetables, a huge category of, important sources of nutrients, especially your green leafy vegetables. Fantastic. That's going to be one of your richest sources of natural folate. A lot of antioxidants, tends to be very anti-inflammatory. If normalizing your cycles or, balancing PCOS or anything like that is going on, vegetables, like half of our diet should be vegetables. And you sit down at your plate, like half vegetables, please, whatever you can. And then lastly, I would say consuming adequate fat is very important, and being really picky about the types of fat that you're consuming. So animal fats are actually very healthy, despite what every public health message has told us for the last 20 plus years, especially when it comes to fertility. Animal fats are essentially the sole source of what's called preformed vitamin A, or retinol, in our diet. Very, very, very important for regulating your menstrual cycles. Also very, very important during pregnancy, and getting it from food is far safer than getting it in supplemental sources. Liver is the number one source of vitamin A, but animal fats also have a lot. So butter, ghee, tallow, which is beef fat, lard, which is pork fat, duck fat, any of the animal fats, fantastic stuff. They're also going to be one of your best choices for fat for cooking, because they don't go rancid upon heating. And then plant fats, some of the plant fats that are good would be like olive oil, avocado oil, coconut oil, macadamia nut oil. Those ones are great too. And then I think that probably segs into stuff to avoid. So the stuff to avoid would be processed vegetable oils like soy, corn, cottonseed, canola oils. Even if you're not cooking with those, these are often listed as vegetable oils in the grocery store, by the way. But even if you don't specifically cook with them, they're used in a lot of products. They're often used for frying foods. So if you're buying chips or crackers or breads, check the ingredients and look at what fat they're using. There are some good brands that are now using healthier oils, like avocado oil. Like Primal Kitchen Foods makes an avocado oil mayo and salad dressings that don't have these problematic fats. The reason they're problematic is they have a lot of what's called omega-6 fats, which are kind of counter to omega-3s. They tend to be pretty inflammatory. They throw off menstrual cycles. They can delay ovulation. They're just overall kind of a problem. And as it currently stands, Americans are consuming probably 10 times more omega-6 fats than they should be. So we don't need to add additional by using a bunch of vegetable oils. We can get plenty of omega-6 fats just eating our whole foods diet and not adding additional ones. The next group of fats to very stringently avoid, and I rarely have people do like a hard no on foods, but trans fats, man-made trans fats are an absolute hard no. So those are liquid vegetable oils that have been turned into a solid through a process called partial hydrogenation. So you'll see them on ingredient lists as partially hydrogenated oils. They are now being kind of phased out of the food supply. I don't see them nearly as often in packaged foods because they started labeling them by law back in 2006. But you can still find them in things like packaged frosting, Cool Whip, certain brands of peanut butter. The worst of all seems to be like the bakery section at grocery stores, like the in-house bakery section, maybe because they can get away with not putting nutrition labels, but like all the frostings on those store-bought birthday cakes, muffins, donuts, they're just all, it's just tons of trans fat. It's crazy. So those are hard no. No margarine, no shortening. If you're baking, use butter, use coconut oil, use real fats and not the trans fats ones. They're really, really harmful to fertility. Very, very harmful. A lot of well-documented results and studies. They're also very, very harmful during pregnancy. Have been linked to impaired vision development in babies. They take the place of normal healthy saturated fats in our cell membranes. So when our cells should be talking to each other like, hey, transfer this nutrient here, hey, put this over there, it gets in the way because trans fats are, at least the man-made ones, are completely foreign to our body. They just muck up all sorts of systems. So those are hard no. Very few things make the hard no list. That does. The other thing to avoid, I'll probably just leave it at these three things, would be refined carbohydrates and sugar. So when we're thinking about planning for a baby, there's a lot of nutrients involved in the process. And anything in our diet that's displacing nutrient-dense foods, we have to think very carefully about why it's there and what role it's playing in our health. And refined carbohydrates and sugars, and by refined carbohydrates, I mean things like products made with white flour or grains that have had their, exterior casing removed. So like white rice versus brown, white flour versus the whole wheat flour. You could get into more intricacies with grains if you want to, but these foods tend to not have a lot of nutrients when we compare them to our other wholesome foods like our vegetables and avocados, our nuts and seeds, our meat, eggs, dairy. And they also tend to dysregulate our blood sugar quite a bit. So you eat refined carbohydrates and sugars, you get a large insulin response, and too much insulin can impact pretty much all of our hormonal systems because insulin itself is a hormone in and of itself. So one of the classic fertility issues related to insulin, or often related to insulin, would be PCOS. And so if that's going on, certainly reducing refined carbohydrates and sugar should be probably number one priority. But B, you start removing these foods and naturally appetite tends to regulate much better, meaning like those mindful eating cues on like how you know when you need to eat and how much you need to eat and when to stop. Those things kind of come into balance when you have fewer refined carbohydrates, but also overall nutrient intake goes way up. They did like a really interesting study in pregnant women, and the number one predictor of women consuming adequate nutrients was their intake of refined carbohydrates or not. So it's a big one.
This is so awesome. I love all this. I have a whole section on diet, and I'm just like so excited by you saying all this.
Good, yes.
So, and I just had a quick question, and there are some questions. When you were talking about the meats, and you mentioned meat on the bone, slow cooked meats, the key for that is the bones, right? When you say slow cooked, you mean put the whole chicken or whatever in there so that, is that the key?
The reason I specify slow cooked is that the types of meat that require you to slow cook them to be edible have a lot of connective tissue in general. So
that's the tough cuts you were talking about.
Yeah, so things that require slow cooking. So you think of like pork shoulder for making pulled pork. That is not, you would not cook that like a pork chop. It would not be delicious. It's not like a tender, not a tender steak. It has a lot of connective tissue in it. And so you need that slow cooking process to break that down. What's in that connective tissue is glycine, that really, really important amino acid, which by the way, also plays a role in our body's detoxification system. So our liver's glutathione production, that's like our main enzyme for detoxing harmful chemicals. Chemicals are like a major problem with fertility. I have a whole chapter on chemicals in the book. Glycine is crucial to the creation and functioning of your main detoxification enzyme. So if we're talking about, reducing toxin load by reducing like exposure to chemicals or plastics or other things, we also need to be talking about eliminating those. Mm-hmm. Glycine is very, very important for that. So yeah, the slow cooked cuts of meat would be high in glycine. The bones, of course, they're all connected to the muscle meats by connective tissue. So of course, bones, cooking the meat on the bone, that will help release those, good healthy amino acids as you're cooking. And then the last place would be like the skin on your poultry, or if you are somebody who likes pork rinds, chicharrones, like those also, any skin, bone, skin, connective tissue, that's where we find those special amino acids. So that's why I specify it, because I feel like a lot of people are steered towards lean meat. Mm-hmm. And the lean meat is usually not the stuff that has the connective tissue in it. It's usually just like, the chicken breast. That's probably like the lowest glycine part of the chicken you could get. If you do the whole bird or do the parts that have the bones and the skin still on it, then you get this very rich broth as you're cooking it, which you should drink or eat along with your food. That gives you these additional helpful amino acids that you wouldn't be getting otherwise.
Awesome. I love this. Oh my gosh. Okay. So let's get to some questions. I just listened to a podcast through Nourish seminar about intuitive eating. Is this synonymous with mindful eating?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
What suggestions do you have for women struggling to eat a variety of food during the first trimester due to appetite changes?
Yeah. First trimester is just crazy pants. Yeah. So,
I was going to say, just don't worry about it.
Yeah, don't worry about it. Which is part of you just do the best you can. You do the best you can. This is why preconception nutrition, if you have a chance to think about it, and if you've been thinking about fertility for a while, you probably have. So you're in good shoes. That's why that's so important, because the first trimester is like, it's anyone's guess what's going to happen. Most women do experience some changes in nausea, food aversions, cravings, appetite. It can just be all over the map. And there's a whole section in the book that goes through that, actually, in chapter 7, I believe, where I talk about all the theories surrounding why it happens, and we don't know for sure why it happens, but it does. So some of the possible reasons can be changes in our thyroid metabolism, like your thyroid gland is under a lot of stress during pregnancy and has to like ramp up production of thyroid hormones, and that seems to play a role in nausea. Some people think it could be related to protecting you from foodborne illness. So I talked about how like you're more susceptible to getting sick from spoiled foods or contaminated foods during pregnancy. And so some of these aversions might be to things that could make you sick. It could also be to protect you from harmful compounds. So like if we think back several thousand years and you're like in the wild with your tribe gathering food, like the most likely place you're going to get sick is from plants. Plants protect themselves by chemical warfare. They create compounds that fend off animals from eating too many of them by giving the animals a stomach ache or making them sick. So wild plants tend to have a lot of those. And so maybe some of these aversions that women have to vegetables could be like a carryover from that. Nowadays, most of our vegetables are so bred away from their wild cousins that they don't really have many toxic compounds, but it still seems that a lot of people get vegetable aversions. I mean, even I had some of that going on. Some of it can be related to changes in your blood sugar metabolism. So like your insulin production starts to go up in early pregnancy, and some women go hypoglycemic in the first trimester more easily. And so they like, even if they were doing a, low carb, intermittent fast sort of thing, keto pre-pregnancy, they find they need to eat more frequently. They need smaller amounts. They need some carbs for a little while. I mean, I'm not crazy about people going hog wild on carbs later in pregnancy, but like early pregnancy, sometimes need it just to survive. It's better to eat than to not eat. So my best advice is to trust that your body has a purpose behind whatever the craving, aversion, appetite change, nausea thing that's going on. Do the best you can. Be super mindful of what makes your symptoms better or worse. So a lot of times, like, thinking about blood sugar balance actually is helpful, even though I know I'm like giving you permission to eat carbs. But if you can get some carbs down, it's probably a good idea to also try to get something else down with it so you don't go on a crazy blood sugar roller coaster. So say you get like a bite of banana in. Okay, great. Maybe you can have a bite of almond butter to help sort of like balance it out, stabilize your blood sugar. You just got to take like each day as best you can and do the best you can. I don't know what to say. It's really hard. It's really hard.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I also feel like after that first trimester, for me, and this is the recommendations that I have for people, but you kind of said something else. So I'm interested, but I'm just like, you just kind of go back to how you were eating. You just never get never allow yourself to be hungry. And then I always say, and eat fats, like really healthy fats. The more fats, the better. Because I think, even what you're saying about eggs, eat the yolks,
Yes.
Eat the skin on the meats. We've all been so far removed from what's really healthy, such as these really healthy fats.
Yeah. If you're doing carbs, like definitely pile on the fats in it. Like if the only thing you want in the morning is bread, piece of toast, like lots of butter, just lots of butter.
Yeah.
So you don't get a huge crazy blood sugar swing. It's hard. It's really hard in that first phase, but you're right. There's some people who do, some people are able to maintain like the way they were eating beforehand. By the way, I have some people who are like, as long as I stay low carb, eat plenty of fats, get my protein in the morning, I don't have any issues. And then other people, it's like, it's the reverse. So it's tricky, but yes, the blood sugar balance thing in general does help mitigate some of the symptoms.
Yeah. But you were talking about cravings later, and I thought this was interesting, and maybe I misread this, but like I've had people tell me, throughout their pregnancy, they had to have, my sister had to have a key lime pie every night. And I'm like, so was her body telling her something? Or I had a client that needed a chocolate cake. Like she would make a chocolate cake every other day and eat it. Is that really?
Yeah, what's with that? What is with that? So the craving thing, it is tricky because I think there are,
after the first
that section in the book got like so long, and like there's so many different areas that I talk about, but cravings can be pregnancy specific. Cravings can be non-pregnancy specific, but because we're pregnant, we identify it as a pregnancy thing. Cravings could be purely for a food that is highly addictive because it's highly addictive. So like high sugar, like you get, it's like, think about after the holidays when you eat, we all eat more sugar than we should over the holidays. And like that first week of January, it's like fighting the crazy craving train because you've been eating so much sugar that your body comes to expect it. So some of that is what we've conditioned ourselves to, and the hormonal physiological response to have sugar, blood sugar high, blood sugar crash, need more sugar situation. What I found interesting when I was like reading about all the different possibilities for why cravings could pop up in pregnancy, there are some cultures where pregnancy cravings don't even have a translation in their language. And it seems to be a cultural thing. So like Americans in particular, like pregnancy cravings are like a thing. It's like, oh, you're pregnant. What are you craving? Everybody starts asking you, and you almost feel conditioned to choose something, you know? I certainly had different points in my pregnancy where I wanted certain foods more than other foods, but I never really thought of it as a craving because I was just eating mindfully, right? So I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I really want to have some olives right now. Okay, I really want to have this for breakfast today. And it wasn't like this thing that I had to like fulfill this expectation that I had some bizarre craving for a weird combination of foods. But I think we have to be like really careful in how we interpret cravings and understand, is it like an appetite thing, like above the neck response, or is it like a hunger thing, below the neck response? Is it a need for a certain amount of nutrients? Like, is a craving for chocolate cake because you need more magnesium? Is it because you're restricting your food intake earlier in the day and you're not getting enough calories, so you're like literally starving for food? Is it a response to somebody's expectation? Is it a response to, I'm pregnant and I have permission to eat for two, I have permission to not worry about my body size once and for all in this crazy world that puts women in this bizarre box of physical expectations? Like, it could be so many things. I just really encourage people to get curious about what could ring true for them, and then within that context, make the best quality choice that you can. So if you have a craving for chocolate, I'm a big chocolate fan. If you have a big craving for chocolate, I would like steer you towards like a super dark chocolate, maybe combined with some nuts for even better blood sugar balance, versus chocolate cake. Or maybe there is a lower carb chocolate cake thing that you could make. I mean, there's like flourless chocolate cakes out there, and you could cut the sugar down in the recipe or something and still fulfill the chocolate craving without the insane amount of sugar that you get from a typical chocolate cake. Like, how could you fulfill the craving in the most healthy, least detrimental way possible? And usually with cravings, that means like, how do you minimize the sugar that's in it, or the amount of like white flour that's in the product? And sometimes that'll help.
Awesome. Yes. And those are all really, you brought up a lot of interesting reasons behind the cravings. I had never thought of that. Really interesting.
Yeah.
And then the last question we have is, for eggs, any preparation okay? Is there a special preparation better for eggs than another?
Yeah. So I take a bit of a rogue stance on the whole foods to avoid based on food safety during pregnancy, because the conventional guidelines are so strict that they actually keep women from eating enough nutrients. So second of all, the chances that you get sick from certain foods should be taken into consideration when you're deciding what you will eat and not eat in pregnancy, or how often you're going to eat that food. So with eggs, for example, the risk with eggs with runny yolks, which conventionally you're told to avoid, the risk is getting infected with salmonella. The chances that an egg has salmonella is about 1 in 30,000. It is 7-fold lower in farms that raise their chickens organically or on pasture. So if you get really good quality, first of all, eggs, very overall low risk that you will get sick from eggs during pregnancy. Second of all, you choose better quality eggs, and that risk is like exponentially reduced. So I say eat eggs however you like them and choose the best quality that you can get, particularly if the only way you like your eggs is with runny yolks, because the risk of a nutrient deficiency, especially choline, from not consuming eggs just because of the runny yolks far outweighs the chances that you'll get sick from the eggs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, and what are your thoughts on caffeine? I'm guessing during pre-pregnancy and pregnancy.
Yeah, pre-pregnancy, there doesn't seem to be any like particular restriction. I mean, I think we need to kind of have some common sense about caffeine because there's so many studies going back and forth on coffee, like coffee will save your life, coffee will like kill you tomorrow, you know, it's like all over the place. So I mean, in general, you know, I think most people benefit from limiting their caffeine to like 2 cups of coffee or less a day, at any time. During pregnancy specifically, the limit appears to be about 200 milligrams per day. And I actually looked at, you know, newer research on this as I was researching for the book, and studies go back and forth on if women could get away with having more caffeine or not. All of the major analyses, like the ones that have looked at 50 plus or more studies, they all come to the same conclusion that we should still limit caffeine because there are some potential risks, even if it's small. So 200 milligrams of caffeine is about 2 small cups of coffee a day, 2 8-ounce cups of coffee a day. And that also depends on the strength that you make your coffee. So that's probably for most people equivalent to 1 cup of coffee a day.
Mine would be like a fourth a cup, yeah.
Yeah, and like tea or chocolate don't have enough caffeine for you to really worry too much, but it's mostly coffee. Yeah, it's hard. It's one of those topics we don't have perfect answers on. So the default answer is just keep it limited.
Okay. Well, I think that's all the questions that we had. This was amazing. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Yeah.
You and I are
Happy to be
so
here.
on the same nutritional page, and I love that because
Good. Yeah.
I often don't agree.
Yes.
I love it.
Yes.
I loved everything you were saying. Yes, getting the book. Yes, so interesting. Absolutely. Yes, everybody, please share what you thought of Lily's talk in her book.
Hopefully I wasn't too
Oh my gosh.
I get a little detail oriented.
I mean, listen, it was amazing. This is like gold. I mean, you just left us
good.
like a pile of gold. Like, thank you so much.
Oh, awesome. Good.
Yeah, getting the book too. Thank you. Yes.
Oh,
So here is the book.
wonderful.
And is it coming up right or is it reverse? I can't tell.
It's coming up correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll include the link, of course.
Yeah.
In everything. But yes, I can have runny eggs. Yay. Thank you so much for tonight. Very helpful. Eating eggs tomorrow. Yes.
Yeah, chapter 4 has the big discussion on food safety during pregnancy and my thoughts on all the foods to avoid list. So some really interesting stuff in there on sushi, deli meats, soft cheeses, vegetables.
A lot of misconceptions, right?
Yeah. So like, by the way, like you're more likely to, the food category you're most likely to get sick from is raw fruits and vegetables. Nobody warns pregnant women not to have a spinach salad, right?
Wow.
So, and I'm not going to tell you to not eat a spinach salad either. Like, eat your spinach salad, but like, be smart about the quality of and freshness of whatever you're having at any time. Trust your nose. Like, if your salad greens don't smell right, don't eat them, because that's actually more likely to get you sick than an undercooked steak or runny eggs or sushi it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, and just so you guys know, because I'm looking at now, she does talk about everything from alcohol and caffeine. She has this in here too. Meal plans. She has meal plans in here. So 7 days of real food meal plans and snacks and beverages, and then a whole section on prenatal or just supplements, excuse me. Lots of exercise, lab tests, toxins. This is amazing. I'm so excited. Yay. Oh, and then
Yay.
even fourth trimester into breastfeeding and postpartum nutrient replenishment, all that. I love this. Mental and emotional health. Love it.
Try to cover all the bases.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. This is amazing. You really are covering so much, from not just nutrition, but to mental health. And you're covering health in general.
Health.
From
Yeah.
the
Health in
inside
general.
out.
Important
Yeah,
to all of us, important to fertility.
Yeah.
The references for everything, of course, are all related to pregnancy specifically, but I could have written a very similar book called Real Food for Fertility, and food recommendations minus some of those random things like the caffeine and the food safety. Like those things probably wouldn't have been as big of discussions, but the things to emphasize, the caring for your mental health, the supplement stuff, optimizing your nutrient intake, it's very, very similar, fertility and pregnancy.
Yes. Yeah. And I also love that this covers a lot of environmental issues as well. So thank you. Well,
Hey,
thank
you're
you
so welcome.
much, Lily. I'm so excited to help you spread the word on this awesome book. And I have no doubt that this book will be a part of my curriculum. So
awesome. That's great to hear.
Yes.
Hey, yeah, appreciate it.
Very soon. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care. Have a great evening, everyone.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.